power to me is really about owning all parts of you. It's not power over someone. It's really standing in your own power, right? It's knowing who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to show up in the world. And that's why I created You Amplified. When people ask me, about speech coaching or whatever, and I said, no, really owning your power is knowing all parts of you and not being afraid to take up space and to do it with certainty.
You're listening to Make Some Noise podcast, episode 408 with guest Angela Chee. Welcome to Make Some Noise podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad that you are here. This is the 3rd time I have tried to record this introduction for you. I keep getting tongue-tied, and I think I need to just slow down. I get so excited when I come on here to do these introductions. I'm just excited that you're here and glad that there are so many women who are embracing personal development and are on the path to living their best life. And this closes out, today's episode closes out the Make Some Noise series that I was doing, where I hand selected several women to come on and talk specifically about confidence and how that relates to a lot of the topics in my book. Angela Chee is here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in just a minute. But first, I wanted to ask you if you could please leave a review for Make Some Noise, especially if you bought it from Amazon. It's like a verified purchase type of review, and I think they're more likely to show up. Or if you purchased it from Audible, same thing. And if you didn't purchase it from either of those places, another great place to do it is Goodreads, if you use the app, obviously. And I love Goodreads. You can follow me over there. You can see the copious amounts of fiction that I read. If you like thrillers, if you like chick lit, which I love, and yeah, you'll see all of the books that I've read over the last few years on Goodreads. And the other thing I wanted to tell you in this intro is to congratulate the winners of the sharing contest. It actually ended a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to congratulate the following people. Crystal Kordalchuk, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Tanya Ann, Stacy Price, Katie Turner, Christina Lynn, Colleen McSpirit, Robin Murnack, Carly Stevenson, Janae Anderson, and Tracy Cornell. These women were randomly selected and won signed copies of my books, Amazon gift card, candles, journals, all kinds of fun things. Thank you so much to all of you who participated in that sharing contest. The kind of big push has kind of come and gone, but I'm so grateful for your support, whether you're leaving a review on any of those places that I mentioned or participated in the sharing contest, or even, actually, this is the last thing I wanted to mention, participating in the free book club that's going on right now. It's not too late to join. When this episode comes out, we'll be officially starting on chapter 2, but you can for sure come and catch up. Go to AndreaOwen.com/MSN to sign up. All you need is a copy of the book. Doesn't matter which format. And I want to tell you this quick thing, which was so interesting. So last week, I posted something on the TikTok, and there was this trend happening where you just sort of stare at the camera and it slow zooms out and you put text on the screen and you type something that people can relate to, maybe something that's happened in your life. And I did that, and I typed out, when you realize you've spent your whole life being accommodating towards others at your own expense in order to avoid making others uncomfortable. And then in the next few moments, I said, and then you realize you don't know what you want in your life. And well, that baby went viral. And I didn't even speak a word at all in that video. It was all text on the screen. It was like a 10-second video. It's really interesting what takes off on TikTok and what doesn't. But there are hundreds of comments from women who are like millennial, Gen X, baby boomer age, and saying, me too, oh my gosh, this was me, or this was me a few years ago. I'm on the road in therapy to change this. I started setting boundaries, but a lot of hands raised. And actually a lot of people came to the book club because they didn't know who I was before that. So they grabbed a copy of the book and are now in the book club. And I wanted to mention that because what fascinates me about that is the amount of people that could relate. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. In a way, it's infuriating as someone who is actively trying to push back on the culture that makes us feel this way and has us wake up one day and realize, shit, I have been living my life for everyone else. I've been running around like crazy, making everyone else a priority, putting myself last. And you kind of pick your head up and look around. And for some people, they go through a major life transition, empty nesters, divorce, change in career, turning 40, turning 50, turning 60, and then realize, I don't know what I want. And I want to mention too, there's this space of grief or frustration. There's an emotional place that happens there. And it's the point of no return that I talk about all the time, that place of realizing something big, a behavior that you've been doing, a belief that you've been holding on to, and then kind of feeling stuck as to, oh my gosh, what's next? And not knowing what's next, or knowing what's next, what are the solutions, and being sometimes afraid, sometimes having trepidation about moving forward to try to move away from that place. And I always want to acknowledge that space because it can feel overwhelming and confusing. And I think the vast majority of us have been there. I've certainly been there more than once, for sure. I think it's part of the process. Anyway, before I keep talking and make this a solo episode, let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Angela Chee is a media communication coach, keynote speaker, and emcee, and the creator of Amplified and host of The Power of the Only podcast. A former TV news anchor and reporter with more than 20 years of media experience. By the way, she was on the news in my hometown in San Diego. She now works with visionary leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs who are ready to own their power and their voice and amplify their message and mission through speaking, video, and media. Her speaking career started at age 15 when she was the first Asian American woman to win the title of Miss California National Teenager. Now, Angela presents inspirational and transformative keynotes and corporate trainings for Fortune 500 companies, universities, and professional associations on topics related to leadership, communication, women's empowerment, diversity, and media. So without further ado, here is Angela. Angela, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited.
We made it.
Yes.
we had some technical difficulties last time, but I'm so glad that we are here and your microphone is so cute. For anyone that's just listening to this via audio, go check out the video because your microphone matches your outfit, which is super cute. And it also matches my book. So
I love it. I love hot pink, and I don't color coordinate all the time, but this is my color. So I found this really cool mic cover.
I thought of you when we picked the color. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
It's such a great color. I think it's a power color. Some people think it's, for tweens, but I'm like, nonsense.
No.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. I want to kick things off with a bang and ask you about power, because this is something that you work on with people. And what I'm most curious about is you telling me and the listeners is, what does power mean to you as a woman?
Power to me is really about owning all parts of you. It's not power over someone. It's really standing in your own power, right? It's knowing who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to show up in the world. And that's why I created You Amplified. When people ask me, about speech coaching or whatever, and I said, no, really owning your power is knowing all parts of you and not being afraid to take up space and to do it with certainty.
Have you always been like this as a child? Like, were your parents, constantly trying to kind of rein you in, or did something happen in your life that made you, kind of tap into your power? What does that look like?
And I think that's what's so special, right? It's not about power that like, oh, we were just born this way. It's kind of like, how do we tap into our own power? So no, I grew up, I'm Chinese American, typical immigrant story. My parents immigrated here in the 70s. And, I was always taught to not rock the boat, to play it safe. I've always been really outgoing, but when I was little, I was like a shy Asian girl with a little bowl cut, and, I really came into myself probably not until about junior high, but culturally, I was taught to play it safe, to be quiet. And so finding my voice and finding my power has been a journey. And although I know that it's always been in me, but it is a process. So no, I didn't always own my power or my voice.
That's so, I think we all had that bowl cut, and you and I are around the same age. And did you grow up in San Diego?
I live in San Diego. I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles.
Okay, so not far.
Yeah.
But I feel like all across the country and probably in parts of Canada and even in Europe, that bowl cut was it.
Well, it was like bangs, right? But some foreheads aren't made for bangs. Like I have a really short forehead. So some people probably had really cute bangs. Mine was just like, it was inexpensive. No one got their fancy haircut. My mom just trimmed it, right? So
it was like the Dorothy Hamill cut. For people who remember who that is. What do you see as the biggest obstacle that women face when they're trying to step into that power? And I would love to know if it's both, external obstacles and also the internal stuff. What do you see?
I definitely think it's both. So when I work with my clients, I talk about the external, right? How do you show up? How do you stand? How do you communicate? But the deep stuff really is, as it's the internal. But here's even a deeper layer. So we think it's our voices, right? Our inner voices. We've talked about how to become motivated and inspirational and overcome our inner voices that are conscious. But what about the subconscious ones? Now that's when you get to the deep part. So I don't want to go too deep, but it's kind of like, what part of the journey are you on? Right. Some people are just
We're happy to go deep. Tell us, like, if you don't mind, like, what do you, like, how do you get somebody to tap into those unconscious beliefs?
For someone that's just starting, it's kind of like external, right? Oh, sure. I need to sit up straight. I need to, not use my hands. I need to use my voice. That's all external. The internal is like, oh, well, I say not so nice things to myself, right? We all have that inner voice, that inner child, something that wasn't met that, we say we all have it. Now, what about the stuff? So for me, I don't have an issue with that. When I was younger, I had to really culturally kind of reprogram myself, right? So if my parents taught me to play it safe, to not rock the boat, and then, my 7th grade teacher was the first one that said, hey, you should do a speech competition. I was like, oh, okay. And then I really reprogrammed by doing, right? By doing it and knowing that you can do it, you sort of reprogram those voices and then you create a new voice, right? And then it goes on throughout your life. But for me, I've always been super driven. And so all through my 20s, I worked my butt off to get into TV news, and I became a TV news anchor and reporter. So you think, oh, she's broken through all her barriers. She has none of them. Well, then I became a mom, right? And I reinvented myself. I became a mom. Right?
I didn't mean to burst out laughing, but just things get turned upside down.
Right. And so if you're on the beginning of your journey, yes, it's those inner voices. But now that I've broken through all these different levels, right? I reached the top. I broke through all those barriers. I believed in myself. I was confident. But now as a mom and an entrepreneur, I went through another transition. And now as my kids are turning into teenagers, it's like, oh, I've already worked through all that stuff, right? I'm confident. I have my own business. And then you're like, whoa, right? So this is the deep part. So first honor what life stage you're at and also what level you're at in terms of how far you've stepped into your voice and your power. And so when I say that is that I'm still evolving. It's not like you reach this point where I've used these tools and I've reached the top of my career, right? And then you pivot and something happens, or then it doesn't mean you're not enough right now. You already have everything you need inside you to shine right now. But we continue to evolve. And as we hit those layers, and that's what I'm going deep on now is, so the unconscious ones I'm talking about is I'm going like generationally deep. So I've broken through those barriers that, yeah, great. My parents were Chinese immigrants. They worked hard. They taught me to play it safe. I worked through that by doing, right? Getting on stage, doing. Every time it was successful, oh, that's great. Every time I had a failure, I learned from it. Okay. But now the unconscious stuff is like, what haven't we dealt with yet? Right? Or what if it's not ours? Right. So I've been diving deeper into intergenerational kind of trauma and things that we don't even
tell us more
know.
about that. Please. Yeah. Let's segue over there. Tell us everything.
We'll go deep. So I was just thinking about, when last year, 2 years ago, I did a lot of deep work on why am I still hitting that upper limit, right? Because you have to think about that as successful women, or not even not successful, just empowered women. If you've done some work on yourself, you're like, I already got this. But then you hit this block, right? As you become more successful or bigger or step into more of your power, it's kind of new territory, and you do hit an upper limit. And then you have to say, well, what is this? I already tackled this. And so the intergenerational stuff that I explored is last year I did some deep work and was talking about just being a woman in society, right? Just the container in which you're in. And so I think that's what's breaking open right now is that we know there's the system thing. Yeah, women have been oppressed for ages and, fight for power and blah, blah, blah. But you're like, but I got it together. I'm fine. I've made it. But then you go deeper and you're like, it's still there. Why is it still there? Right. And so this past 2 years, I think we've seen that systems play a big role. Doesn't mean you can't be empowered and take on things, but systems, whether it's for, people of color, for women, they're still there, right? So if you're strong and the system's still there, how do you overcome that? But the unconscious stuff. So I think back, my recent podcast episode I recorded is like, how can we honor our past while still impact the future? So I was thinking back to like my grandparents, like my great grandmother in the, escaped war and chased bombs. And she was like an orphan. And then she made it over to China and then to Taiwan. And then had my mom, and then they had 4 kids, like all that stuff, you're like, oh, that's just a story.
The olden days.
It's just the olden days, but you think about that travels through, there's studies. I don't know. I don't go deep into this. This is not my work, but they say that generational trauma carries through the DNA. Epigenetics, right? And I don't want to go deep into that, but it just made me think like, what is mine and what is not mine? And what can I clear to the best of my ability to know that's what's not mine? Right? Because we keep hitting these same roadblocks and you're like, I've already dealt with that. Like it may not be. And so it's just I think it's important to recognize where we came from. And so the layer 2 is not just look at us, like where we get stuck, but that next level is looking like what could have been in our ancestors or just in our environment or just as our society as a woman, and what can we let go of? It's not ours.
Yeah.
Right. It's not ours to take on, Angela. And to clear it.
That's amazing. I'm mildly obsessed with this topic for a few reasons. Partly because, I don't think you know this. So this book is dedicated first to my daughter, and second to, in like one of the first pages, it says for my mother and her mother and her mother and her mother. Yes. And it's not that I think that all of my grandmothers would approve of a lot of the things that I'm saying in here, different cultures, different generations. However, I talk about this in the book, the resiliency of what these women had to face that we will never know, and that we will never have to face just because of, we're living in modern times.
Yes.
And some families, I think, had it much easier than others. Some women were brought here against their will. Some women had to go through just terrible atrocities. Yeah. And that kind of resilience and trauma, and also so much joy and wonderful things happened. But I do believe that gets carried down, and it comes up when we're up leveling our lives. And I'm also really interested in the mitochondrial DNA, where you can where they map out like your entire maternal line all over the world. That's just fascinating to me.
I mean, we can go way deep on that, but I think what we want to take away with is like what is yours and what's not yours, but you honor the past, right? Like what I say about hardship and war and all that, but I have that resilience in me too. Yeah. It's not just about trauma. We don't want to go too deep into that trauma because you're never always going to know what that is, right?
And there's nothing you can do about it either.
Yeah. It's more about honoring that. Like they didn't have the opportunity to even speak. It wasn't, where do you go with it? Right. And so we have that opportunity. So we should take the positive, right? The resilience, the strength, and I talk about that, just like when, as an immigrant child, I always lived in scarcity. We had okay money, but my parents worked really hard. And now I kind of have, my kids go to the hotels with us and we travel. And I always remind them, I go, look, I didn't travel a lot when I was younger. I didn't stay in nice hotels. And I also don't want to cap them either, right? I remind them of where we came from, but you also don't want to cap that. So that whole scarcity issue, right? I have to overcome that a lot. I love the sales. I love buying things on sale. I'm still not going to let go of that, but not a scarcity. When I want something, I am abundant enough to have it. But I came from a scarcity mindset, and that's how I became successful, right? I became successful because my parents taught me to work hard, never give up, the scarcity mindset, climb to the top, overwork. But at some point that peaks. And then you start, as women, we burn out. And if you're still, doing things the way we were taught to do them because they work for us. So all those things that they taught me, it worked for me until a certain point. And then you got to unravel it and go, what can I take the positive, but move forward with something different?
And learn how to manage what's yours and what's not yours to carry.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that takeaway. Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/noise, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/noise to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/noise. Today's podcast is sponsored by MIDI Health. Ladies, are you over 40 like me and dealing with hot flashes, insomnia, brain fog, moodiness, some vaginal dryness, or weight gain? Don't just accept it as part of aging. These symptoms are often linked to hormonal changes during perimenopause and menopause. At MIDI Health, they get it. Their experts know what you're going through and how to help. MIDI clinicians are menopause specialists offering safe, effective, FDA-approved solutions. And guess what? MIDI care is covered by insurance. So stop pushing through it alone. Schedule a virtual visit and dive deep into your unique symptoms and health background. You'll walk away feeling heard and with a plan to start feeling better. Visit MIDI Health today and reclaim your well-being. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com. joinmidi.com. Well, talk to us about your career a little bit. Like, what are some obstacles that you faced maybe in your 20s as you were climbing the ladder, as a reporter? Like, were there obstacles that you had to face that you look back on that you think that you did really well or didn't do well? Tell us about some of those experiences.
Yeah. Well, going back to the only, I know my podcast, The Power of the Only, I talked about this, is that I've always been the only one, right? The only Asian girl growing up in an all-American neighborhood, and I didn't have a problem with that. At many times I've moved to small markets. I had a market in Bakersfield and in Palm Springs and smaller markets. I was like the only Asian reporter. And now at big keynote events, I'm usually the only woman on a panel or the only woman keynote speaker.
Wow.
But that doesn't bother me. Right? I believe there's power in that. And so that's what I did with my podcast, The Power of the Only. I wanted to change the conversation. Yes, it's hard. I broke through a lot of barriers, but I believe there's power in being the only. And that's the conversation, the mindset I want to shift with people. And so the barriers I broke through, if anything, I kind of lived in a little bubble. I think that because I was so driven when I was younger, I didn't see the system against me. I didn't see what I couldn't do. I always just I'm the only one. So, okay, let's just go for it. And I know not everyone thinks that way. And that's why I started interviewing all these women. I was like, what is it about certain onlys? What did we go through that allow us not to see that as a limitation, even though it's hard? Doesn't mean we didn't work hard. Doesn't mean we didn't have barriers. Why? What's the difference? And I think that the challenges that we go through is our gift, right? Is the strength. But you asked me specific challenges for me, but I actually really look back and I go, how did I do what I did? Because I really think about now, I was like, wow, I was a reporter in Los Angeles, the number 2 market in the country. And I just did it. right? But I worked really hard and I hit roadblocks, but I kind of just went, oh, no? Okay, go around. So to make it in TV news, you really had to have a reel back then. There was no YouTube. There was no cell phones. You had to intern for a long time, ask someone for a camera. And so at night, I would just, I checked out books on broadcast journalism. I got a broadcast extension degree while I was working in Hollywood. So I was working at Entertainment Tonight, China. I was an assistant and I was sitting at my desk, just answering phones, doing the whole Hollywood grind. And I loved it because I learned everything. And at night, I worked on my craft. And the barriers were there was no job for me. Right. So I just had to drive. So I got one in Palm Springs. So I drove every weekend to Palm Springs. So at that point, I didn't think I had inner barriers. It wasn't until I got back to Los Angeles. So I skipped over all the hard parts, but I worked 7 days a week, drove, worked 2 days a week in Palm Springs and 5 days a week in Hollywood because I still needed to make money, and you don't make money as a reporter, but I got my reel and I got an anchor job in Bakersfield. And then I became the news anchor there and I worked my way back, and I got back by the time I was 25. And that was a big deal for me, right? The hometown. But when I talk about the inner barriers where I really got stuck is like, I'd made it, right? That was end for me. I'm 25. I'm back in my hometown. I'm in, news reporter, but I was still living at home actually for the first couple of months. That was so funny because I hadn't had an apartment yet. But the first time I realized that I even had inner barriers and started doing some personal development work is I had a voice coach. And he said to me, does being Asian or a woman affect your voice? And I said, excuse me? Because I'd done no personal development work. I succeeded out of pure drive, grit, and hard work, not looking at anything. I can do anything, push. And it got me to where I needed to go. But now it's like, well, now you're here. Now what do you do? And so I looked at him like, what are you talking about? Like, is he being like racist? Like, what is he trying to do to me? Like, what's going on? What do you mean? And it was the first time I realized, and I took a step deeper and I went, oh. And all those voices from my parents started flashing back. All those things of like, my parents had tried to talk me out of TV news. They said, Asians can't do it. Your face is too flat. They told me you could be like Connie Chung when you grow up, because I always wanted to be like Connie Chung. But then when it came down to it, they said, oh, it's dangerous, or you're not going to get married, or you're not, like all those things. Right. And I had blocked all that out, but it started coming back and I go, ooh, where am I playing small? So I broke through a lot of barriers by sheer grit, but those voices, if you don't deal with them, they do come back. And, specific external barriers, of course, navigating, the newsroom and navigating Hollywood. But I always had this really optimistic outlook that I could do anything without being toxic positivity. Then I didn't even know what that was. I was just like, I really thought I could do anything.
That works for a little while. I will say for a lot of people that works for a little while until it
works. And then you start to heal it back. And so he gave me that first taste of like, oh, where do I get stuck? Why do I still have those voices when I anchor? Why do I think about that? Why do I still have that voice that says I'm not good enough? I didn't even know I had them. And then he made kind of crack that open. And then through the years, especially after I left the news. So in the news, I was just too busy to think about it. I was just like on fire and just driven. So driven. I woke up at like 4 a.m. I did the morning news. I hosted like 5-hour shows. I didn't have space to think. But the first time I did personal development work was really in my 30s. It kind of broke me open and started dealing with like my parents, like, oh, I need to honor my parents more. They actually are strong. I don't have to take care of them. There's a gift that they gave me, not that they were a burden. I always felt my parents were a burden. For immigrant children, I think sometimes, or not even just immigrant children, but depending on how you grew up or the roles that you played, I always had to I was the older sister. I had to take on a lot, and it felt like a burden. And I learned to really appreciate all the gifts that they gave me. And no, they weren't a burden. They were doing the best that they could. So that was my first barrier I broke through in my 30s, was honoring my past. That's how I honor my past. And then, lots of other work after I became
it all came tumbling down.
And then when I became an entrepreneur, it all came up.
Right. That's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole other journey.
Children. Well, it sounds like that's perspective work, and shifting your perspective from feeling like they were a burden to, there's a whole nother way of looking at this. So I love that you kind of had that epiphany, and just by the power of coaching, him asking you that question that took you off guard, that you probably didn't sound like you immediately had an answer to it. But when you really start to think about it, there's stuff there.
Yeah. And that seems so long ago. Right now I'm done tons of work and different things, but now it's like that next level. But that was the first time where I even noticed that I had an internal voice.
Well, speaking of voices, you talk about the importance for women to own their voice. So what does that really look like for a woman, whether, we're talking about doing the work to start that process of owning her voice or just out in the wild or both?
Yeah. I really think owning our voice is really feeling comfortable to speak up with certainty. And again, to take up that space. But I think it starts with taking a closer look of who are you? What do you stand for? And how do you want to show up in the world? And when people ask me to be their coach for communication, right, for on-camera video and different things, we do that. I set up the equipment and do all that. But then it's really about, I want them to be you amplified and clear. Who are you? What do you stand for? And how do you want to show up in the world? And when you know that and you are aligned and you are embodied, the other things fall into place. So that's a personal journey, right? Owning your voice is a personal journey, and knowing, where do your voices come from? What does stop you? Why do you believe what you believe? Right. And so that's the unraveling of the deeper work of truly owning your voice, right? There's the external part of doing voice exercises, how to warm up. We were talking about how to warm up for a podcast before, how to sit up straight, how to look good on camera. But the deeper work is that part, right? Where did your barriers come from? What stops you in that moment? And how do you own that, right? How do you understand that awareness? And so that you can speak up with certainty because you are clear on who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to show up in the world.
I love that. I hope everybody jotted those questions down. That's such an important foundation. And it's one of those things where everyone needs to do that work, no matter who you are. What do you stand for? What's important about the way you live your life? And also, I feel like that's helpful even for women who aren't necessarily interested in being entrepreneurs or being on camera or filming videos or whatever, because social media has really changed our lives. And I would say the vast majority of people are on some platform, and that requires visibility. And whether you're just posting pictures of your 4th of July weekend or you're stating your political opinion, it's, there's no right or wrong way to show up on social media. But I know of a lot of women who are afraid to speak up about things, whether they consider themselves a quote unquote activist or not, but just that fear of visibility. And I think that before I tell somebody to go take action or hold them accountable around it, it's exactly what you said. It's about unpacking what's going on. Like, why? Tell me about the beliefs that you have where that's unsafe.
Yeah. You don't want to just, and when people say speak up, you speak up in the way that honors where you are at in your journey. Not everyone needs to be an activist. Not everyone needs to be big and bold to be heard. You can share your voice in the ways that you feel comfortable in your own household, with your children, with your spouse, significant other. Like it's when you are clear on what you want and have your boundaries in place and are clear and have done, it doesn't have to be deep inner work. It's just like, what do I believe? And why do I believe this? And how do I want to show up? And that shifts too, right? I'm sure everyone's been through this whole journey and they're asking these questions of themselves right now over this past year. And it does go deeper. Integrity is like my number one value. Do what you say what you mean. I truly believe that. And, it used to be that I don't think in my 20s I ever thought about that. I was like, okay, cool, whatever, and I always told the truth. Yeah. I always was honest and was on time and told the truth. But I mean, integrity in terms of, would I not buy someone's product because I don't align with that? Would I make a stand and go out of my way to do something because it doesn't align with my values? I don't know that I would have done that when I was younger. It just wasn't a priority for me. Now it's like, if something starts to feel uncomfortable in your system, you're like, no, I'm going to step up. So integrity is really important to me. And when I'm out of integrity, it really bothers me. Like, even like if I committed to your podcast and something else came up, I'm like, no, I have to be for me. That's for me. That's my value, right? So what is your value? And then when you feel uncomfortable, what you need to do, it's like staying embodied in who you are. But it doesn't have to be super deep. It's just kind of where are you at right now? Right. And how do you want to show up? Yeah.
I go on and on about values. I swear it comes up like every 4th podcast episode that I talk about. It's foundational in personal development work. And I feel that people don't visit that exercise enough and also talk about what does that look like in their life? And like you said, it doesn't need to be necessarily deep, but when something happens, how do you want to show up? Tell me about it. What in a scenario or a circumstance that's really uncomfortable, what would happen for you to follow your values? And it's also interesting. So my values are my top values are responsibility, trust, and courage. And the way that you described integrity is not that all that different from mine. So it's interesting how people describe them and name their values, even though a lot of times we're talking about very similar things about showing up.
Well, and I want to say something about that. Like when I work with my clients and I have them show up on stage, I have them pick 4 adjectives. Like, what is your you amplify persona? Doesn't mean you aren't all the 50 other things, but what words have power too, right? So we may be reaching for the same thing, but if integrity brings up that energy for me, that's the word I want to use for myself. When you look at a page and you think passionate, right? To another person, passionate may not resonate. Empowered may resonate more. It may mean the same thing to them, but when you look at that word and you feel that word and you're like, oh yeah, right? So it's really about what resonates with you. And so words are super powerful.
Yes, they are. Speaking of words, since you have so much experience in your career and with speaking up, and we just talked about value, so I'm sure that this is maybe part of the answer, but what advice would you give for a woman who's struggling to maybe speak up at work or in another career situation?
Yeah. Well, first I'll do something really tactical, like just, in the moment, what you can actually do. People say, oh, how do I speak up at work? The first thing I want you to think about without going into the deep level stuff is just what value can you provide in this moment? Don't get bogged down with everything. Like if you want to speak up at a meeting, what value can you provide to the audience or to that group? It's not about you. It's not about anything. It's like if you have something to say, something comes up and you want to say it and you're like, oh, it's already been said. But just think, what value can I provide in this moment, and let the words come out, right? Whether you're on a panel for a talk, or if you're just in the boardroom, or you're at a meeting, or you're interacting with people, if you have that fear, right, that overrides because you're like, oh, what I have to say is important and it provides value. It's not about me. It provides value. Another thing I would say, for people who get that nervous energy, that thing that they feel, whether they're doing something big, like going on a podcast or speaking on a stage, or even just for some people, they get that when they're just speaking to another person. Maybe, they have a little anxiety or whatever. I want you to think about not as fear, like not to call that fear. It's energy. It's energy because you want to say something big. You want to do something different. It's your body generating the energy to do something, right? So it's actually working with you, not like, oh, there's that, not confidence again. Oh, that's that fear. That's that pit in my stomach. Words are powerful, right? What if it's the energy getting you ready to do something big or great, or just to speak your mind? It doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah.
And another thing I would say is just remind yourself that, I've interviewed hundreds of, politicians, executives, leaders in my news life. But now that I've gone deeper on my podcast, everyone struggles with imposter syndrome, right? They struggle.
That's true. To some extent. Yes. I agree with that.
And I don't even call it imposter syndrome. I don't even use that word because I think we all want to do better, be better, know that we matter, that we're showing up our best. And so for some people, they just call it immediately imposter syndrome because they feel like they don't belong. For other people who have maybe they're, best-selling authors already or speakers, when I talk to them and it comes down to it, they still struggle with it a little bit. But the ones that have done the work, like for me, I don't call it imposter syndrome. It's just, I want to do better. So how can you do better? I do the work around it. If I don't know, like if I'm on something or on a show or something where I feel out of my league and I don't know, then I know that's a signal to me that I need to do some more work to make sure that I do feel ready. So I don't think it's a bad thing. It's a good signal to feel sometimes like an imposter because maybe you have some more work to do. And then that helps you grow. But never to make it say like, oh, you're horrible, you don't belong. Not that kind. So I don't even call it imposter syndrome. I just call it everyone has that. We have that feeling because we want to do better.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective. I like that a lot. And similar thing that I have learned to do that is helpful in that regard when I find myself, on a panel with people who have, far more experience than I do around a topic. And I'll feel that little bit of trepidation and sometimes intimidation. It, might feel differently to different people, the way that they describe it. I remind myself that there is something that I am more of an expert at than all of these people on the panel.
Yes.
For instance, my own children's mental health, even if it's something like impossible for them to know about, because we have different superpowers, we have different skills, we have different competencies, we have, different experiences, everyone. And yes, you may be 22 or something listening to the show and not have as much life experience or just, time on this planet, but still there's something. We all have it to varying degrees. And that's what I think about. And it can be helpful. So I love, just kind of putting all these different tools in people's minds.
You live in your zone of expertise and you can always grow and learn more. But I think that it's important to feel that. But I think when you know who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to show up in the world, you will be at peace on that stage or with yourself. And then you don't have to fight those things, right? And know that this is my zone of genius. I don't know that. And that's okay. I don't know that area that they know. And that's okay too. And if it's something you want to do and it's tugging at you or it makes you feel either jealous or inferior, maybe that means that you want to go in that direction. So it's kind of a signaling of maybe, then maybe I'll do more work in that. Then I do want it. But if you don't want to, I let go. There's certain things where I just that is not my area. Like even when I was talking about intergenerational trauma, I learned from my mentors or whatever. That's not an area that I want to help people go deep into. That's not my area. I know enough to serve my purpose and how to help people and to get people. But I don't want to do a deep dive into that because it's not my work. And that's okay. Yeah.
100%. That's something I learned with experience. So in the beginning of this career, I, like many, have had a few different careers, but I would get asked questions either on interviews or, one time I was hosting a workshop and the conversation completely took a turn and they were asking me about something that was not in my wheelhouse. Yeah. And I remember feeling like I had to kind of hustle and scramble to come up with something that sounded okay. And I was stumbling around it. And then they asked me a follow-up question. And I just was really honest. And I said, I would so love to help you with this. And I felt so afraid to say that. I just felt like, oh my God, they're going to think that, why did we hire her? And she's stupid. This was a mistake. Of course, my inner critic was like, you should have an answer to everything. Yeah. I was really transparent and said, I would love to, I can answer any question about this, and this topic, which is what we actually came there for.
Yes.
And it was fine. They didn't, the bottom didn't drop out. I have definitely been in that place where my paycheck ran out before the next one got here. Life doesn't happen bi-weekly, so why should payday? The money you earn can be in your hands today with Earnin. Earnin is an app that gives you access to your pay as you work, up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. Just download the Earnin app and verify your paycheck. Then access up to $100 a day as you work and leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. You can use Earnin to pay for a girls' night out, a last-minute gift for a loved one, or even summer camp for the kids. Make Earnin a part of your financial routine and join Earnin's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about Earnin, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download Earnin today, spelled EARNIN, in the Google Play or Apple App Store. When you download the Earnin app, type in noise under podcast when you sign up. It really, really helps the show. Noise under podcast. Subject to your available earnings, location, daily max, and pay period max. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC. Fast forward to the end of 2024 and think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If you want to learn a new language, you absolutely should get Babbel. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Now it's so easy to speak simple conversation phrases noises with the guy that takes care of my lawn without having to consult language apps. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/noise. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/noise, spelled BABBEL.com/noise. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I think when you're really clear, right? There's times when I'll do like pre-calls for talks and I go, what do you need? And I go, I do this, I do that. That, if you want that, so-and-so may be better for that. I don't actually go there, but I can touch it. I like to be really clear with myself and clear with others. And if, questions pop up on a panel, sometimes you can ad lib a little bit because you know the area, but you don't need to lie about it, right? You're like, oh, well, this is what I know. And that's actually something I teach in media interviews. If it's your topic, you should know it, right? You don't want to blank out on, what you're teaching. But when it's something kind of out of left field or you get random questions, you're like, how do I handle random questions? You're like, well, here's what I do know. But that, or you pivot, right? You pivot out of the question, or you say, I don't know that part. So-and-so is better at that. Or maybe you want to talk to John or, Emily, who specializes in that. And I think that's okay. People just want an answer because you could either be a resource. You could either just tell the truth and say, I don't know it, or I'll find out, and I think that's all people want.
Exactly. Yes. And I found that out that day. And since then, I'm always just really honest, and I will connect them with someone who knows better or do exactly what you said.
But unlike you though, I do like to know a little bit about everything. So I do. That was like my news anchor days. I would just read and read. And I was like, why is that? How about that? I didn't know about that. And then I'll read like another Wikipedia article that leads to another article. So I know at least what they're talking about. So I think that's fine, to know context, but I don't dive deep. But yeah, I like to know everything too.
Yes. At least be able to pronounce things correctly. Well, let's talk about money for a minute. It can be a sticky topic for women. And I'm so glad that we are sort of changing how the conversation is, and that more women are starting to invest and things like that. But we still have some progress to make. Can you talk to us or give the listeners advice if they might be struggling with negotiating salaries, or if they're an entrepreneur raising their rates, or if they're in a partnership having a hard conversation with their partner about money? What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because money it goes deep. It's tied to all that, owning your voice and your power. It's really, money is just an expression of that. And it really goes back to, for women in our society, we weren't, what was it? You weren't allowed to have your own bank account until 1972?
I think it was 1972. Yeah, that was the year my husband was born.
So a year before I was born, you couldn't have your own bank account
without your husband or your father's permission.
Right. And so if you're not married or whatever, so I didn't even know that. Right. So I've always been like, oh, my money, I've always like make my own money, whatever, but it's there, right? Those thought processes are there. And so for me with money, I always came, like I said before, we talked about it, as an immigrant child, I came from scarcity. So what's a deal? Buy things on sale. I broke through that when I became an entrepreneur and I started spending money on myself in terms of my personal development, making big investments, but I didn't even do that right after I had the baby. My husband's like, well, why don't you do that? And I go, oh, it's too expensive. Oh, I'll wait. Or I had to struggle with that a little bit, even though, and it depends on what stage you're at. So I've always made my own money. I depended on no one, right? And even in the news business, I almost ran out of money, like when I was in the small market and I had saved my account and I was like, oh my God, I've invested 2 years and I have zero money in my account. What am I going to do? And then I got the job in LA. So I filled my bank account back up and I was thinking about like property and, different things that I could do, but I wasn't rolling in it. I was still just surviving. And then it's interesting. So I've always been empowered with money, but then when you become an entrepreneur and then when you get married, right? If you get married, do we fall into those old roles? Who makes more? We fall into gender roles. So I'm your typical poster child for empowered woman, but yet I'm an Asian woman and I grew up in this society and my husband's an executive. He does pretty well. And so I noticed that, I was falling into these subconscious gender roles. If you ask me, I wouldn't say I was unempowered. And he doesn't control the money. We're partners, but why wasn't I spending certain things? Why was I afraid of certain things? And so for charging or whatever, that was the process I went through as an entrepreneur, is really taking a deep look at where did these money stories come from? And they come from my childhood. We didn't have a lot of money, right? So I needed to deal with that. And I needed to spend on myself without fear, right? Spend that I deserved it, And also, so that's spending, but also asking for it, right? Raising my rates
Yes.
But sometimes that does take a little bit. You don't want to just you have to have the credibility and some experience underneath, right? When I first started coaching.
And know how to negotiate.
Yes. And so it is a learning process, right? I'm not saying that just believe in yourself and ask for what you want.
Just barge in the door for $20,000 raise.
Well, men do. Some people do. And I don't think that that's what you need to do either. But if you have the credibility, you've had the experience, you've done the work, whether that's in corporate or you deserve it, then that last limit is you. Right. Mm-hmm. If you haven't done all that, then maybe you do need to not, be so maybe you need to do more work so that you feel confident. But once you've done amount, it's not about, is it worth more? It's about, up here and what do you need to break through? So I'm still breaking. I did break through it several years ago, but I think people need to take a good look at what's yours and what's not, right? Where did your money ideas come from? How did you grow up? Also, what would women, just knowing that women couldn't have bank accounts and that you've come such a long way, but now you got to own all that in yourself. And I really think it's a constant daily thing. So, and then it gets reinforced, right? If you raise your rates and they say yes, and then you're like, oh, I've done that 100 times already. It's totally valuable. It's all subjective too, right? If you have $100,000 salary, if some people make $1 million salary, you talk to someone, their starting salary when I started was like 25,000. But, I talked to some executives now, they're like, oh yeah, well, I got the $1 million payday. I'm like, you make $1 million a year just in a paycheck, right? It's like you keep up leveling of what you feel your system can handle. So, but you constantly have to up level. I actually thought about this. I thought, the other day I was thinking about hotels. So funny. This is so funny. Luxury is enjoying and having pleasure and taking advantage of luxury for me is a revolutionary act in itself. And the reason I say that is because I was looking at booking at hotels. And when I was younger, we didn't stay in nice hotels, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's not that you can't afford it. Something everyone can afford, if you can afford a nice night, but you're like, what are you going to cut corners on? What are you going to deny yourself? Because that's how I was raised. Right. And so I was like, just having the $35 salad is like a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes
service. Uh-huh.
And I'm not saying that you should, if you're struggling with money right now, I don't think, but I just mean that once you've become successful and you've worked really hard, why are we always shortchanging ourselves for what we ask for, shortchanging ourselves and what we think we can afford and scarcity? Oh, but I'll do that for others, but not for me. And those are daily habits that I remind myself when I go, no, I'm going to do this for myself because I can. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean charge your credit card. I just mean
don't have a $35 salad every meal.
Yeah, but
unless you want to.
And it's okay, but it's hard. It's like a battle, It was a battle for me. Like, oh, but I'll just not, or even, as you keep up leveling. So wherever level you're at for you, it could be like when I was in high school, it was like going from Taco Bell to like a $10 meal. Right. And then it was like
to El Torito's,
it's like, oh, wow. The Olive Garden. And now I'm like, ooh, Olive Garden, so you keep up leveling yourself, but it's that daily reminder. So I don't know if that answers your question about money, but it's really important to take a look at what are those messages and what can you up level to? And once you become successful, you have to upgrade your whole system to match it. And that's what's hard.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. Yes, that does answer the question. And it goes right along with what I talked about in the money chapter in my book. And really all the chapters are full of questions. That one is probably full of the most questions because it starts with unpacking your relationship with money, which started in childhood, whether you are conscious of it or not. Yeah. Personally, I didn't have, people in our circles talk about their personal development work and people are, a bunch of my colleagues about 6 years ago, it was like the thing to do to unpack your money story. And people had very clear money stories, whether one of my colleagues was raised by a single parent that wasn't getting any spousal support, or I have another friend who her parents were missionaries. So that she always felt like a charity case and had to have hand-me-downs from her neighbors. And they were very clear.
Yeah.
Mine, not so much. I'm like, my parents never talked about money. We always had enough. We weren't wealthy by any stretch. We stayed at Motel 6s when we went on vacations to like the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
It wasn't fancy, but I did end up uncovering a very poignant story in my life that happened later on in high school. But my point is that, yes, you have to unpack these money stories. And I mean, you can even just, if you don't want to read my book, you don't have to, you can just Google like how to do emotional work around money or unpacking money stories, unraveling money stories, that type of thing. I so agree with what you said about the gender roles around money. I was talking about this on another podcast episode recently. And I think for some of us, we get advice from our parents that we hear and we take it and we run with it, whether it's good advice or bad advice. Yeah. And hopefully it's good advice. And my mom gave me really great advice when I was young. And she said, don't ever rely on a man for money. Always have your own money, and it was an empowering message that I heard her say. I heard her say that more than once. She had an experience where she was a single mom in the 1960s and it was really difficult for her. I did not take that advice. I didn't put that into action. Like I grew up and unconsciously expected men to rescue me and take care of me. And it was like, just some internalized patriarchy for the win there, and just was waiting for my knight to show up on his white horse and whisk me away and get me out of financial trouble. And, always calling my dad to bail me out. And I thought, like, where did that come from? Because my parents surely didn't teach me that. And my mom explicitly told me not to do that. And it came from our culture, and I have to say, like, as cliche as this might sound, but movies like Cinderella and, damsel in distress type of stories, like these tropes that we grow up hearing and romanticizing that, like, it makes me want to just barf now. But it's the truth. And I'm embarrassed to say that, as an empowered feminist now, but it's just where I was at. And I still, my husband and I, he is the stay-at-home parent now, and I'm the sole breadwinner. And when we made that transition, I told him ahead of time, I said, I think that we can really love the idea about it and we can plan as much as we can ahead of time. But when this really happens, when you have your last day at work and you are staying home and you're starting to learn all the ins and outs of this household that I've been taking care of, I'm the only one working, we are likely going to have some disagreements. And we need to be very transparent about what's going on. Because he and I had never up until then had a conversation about gender roles. Like, what did you see growing up? Like, what do you expect of me? And I had to take like my foot off the gas and say, just tell me whatever it is. And I promise I won't get upset.
Yeah, it's hard,
really hard,
right?
When your husband is really honest and says, I unconsciously grew up thinking that the mom should take care of everything.
Yes. So I just need to touch upon this a little bit. So, as we evolve and, my husband is in a totally a great partner. He's empowered. He puts women in, leadership positions, all that stuff, but he grew up how he grew up. And he has a totally feminist hippie mom, everything, right? He's like, what do you mean I think that way? Do you know how I grew up? And we get in these arguments and I go, stop for a second. I go, but you still grew up and swam in the water that everyone swam in, and that's the difference that's we're seeing in the last couple of years. Before it was like, there was people that are empowered and people that aren't empowered, feminists and not feminists, good guys and bad guys or whatever. And now we realize that it's not so cut and dry. Like, I'm empowered, but there's things that I do that don't align with what I think I should do. Or even my husband, he is your great partner. He's super supportive, but there's moments where I was like, did you just say that? Or did you, is that really what you expect? Like, he's like, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I'm like, oh, no, you did. You did mean that because you
unconscious sexism.
Yeah, you grew up, and he's not sexist at all. Like, but he grew up the way he grew up. And we still haven't worked through that. We have these debates a lot. And I go, I'm not going to do a fight right now. I go, and the first time I told him, my husband's white, and we were talking about the word privilege. This was 3 years ago, before all the Black Lives Mattered. He's like, what are you talking about? I grew up poor and da, 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 da. He was like going off. I go, but on paper, he went to an Ivy League school. He's fairly like successful, attractive. I go, on paper, you look like, and he's like, what do you mean? And I go, we're not going to have this discussion right now. And then when everything happened these last couple of years, he looked at me and he's like, I get it, but it takes a while. Same thing now with the gender roles and like the unconscious stuff that we do in our own homes, right? If I wasn't married, I would always take care of myself, whatever. But what happened when I got married? Did I take my foot off the pedal? Right? I took care of and you just have to be conscious about that. I took my foot off the pedal and I stopped working, but not because of any reason other than I was burnt out in news and I really wanted to start something on my own. And I didn't see that it was like it was just intense for what I was making. I was like, I'm good. I want to be with the kids. I'm going to host, I'm going to speak, I'm going to do all these things that aren't, 24 hours a day starting at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. But I lost my identity and it was really hard to rebuild that. And then that's when you fall into those subconscious society things, gender roles. So wherever people are at in their journey, it's interesting, right? You can be empowered and still fall into that and have to fight through it. And it's fascinating.
And I think it's a never ending, by no means, I am not going to use the word battle, but that's the first word that came up. It's a never ending cycle, I think, of growth and of evolution. And in some ways, a revolution to, order that expensive salad or buy the expensive hotel room. I remember, I just want to touch on that really quick when you were telling that story about the fancier hotel. Because I grew up similarly, like we had just enough, and never, we didn't go on fancy vacations. It was, like I said, it was like to Palm Springs and, and to the Grand Canyon, things that were kind of local. Yeah. And we stayed at like Motel 6 and things like that. And they always had a playground. So I was fine. Like I didn't know. We never stayed at the Four Seasons. I didn't know any different.
We used to go to Vegas because Vegas used to be cheap, and I think the hotels were like $35, where they had like they had like the beds that like with the coin.
Yes, with the mirrors on the ceiling.
And it was okay. Vegas was a cheap place back then, but it was funny. I was like, I went to Vegas because they had buffets, and they had. I remember Circus and like $5 meals. It's so funny.
Yes. We did the same thing. We had the same 80s childhood.
Yes.
But I remember when I was in my very early 20s and I had made a reservation at the Hard Rock Hotel. And it was maybe like a $200 a night hotel, which was so much money for me at the time. It felt, it was the most I had ever spent on a hotel room. And something happened where I had to cancel and I wasn't getting my money back. And I was so upset and I was so mad. And I was talking to my boss about it. I worked as an assistant buyer in a buying office. And my boss said to me, I was ranting and all upset. And then she's like, Andrea, she's like, what if it's just money? And I was like, what? This is $200 I'm not getting back.
That was a symbol of everything I stand for in my,
And she's like, I'm not saying that what they did is right. And it's out of your control and it's just money. She said, it is a renewable resource. You can make more. And I remember that advice. And I feel like it was really great advice because we put so much power into it. And yes, it does have power. But I think her point was, you are at choice whether to get that upset over it. Have you contacted them? Have you done everything you could to say what it is that you need to say to argue your point? And if you're not getting anywhere, what if you just change the perspective and then it's just money? Personally, that was incredibly helpful because it allowed me to not have it hold so much power over me. And when I get really upset and nervous and anxious around money, I tell myself that. I think of Sharon and I think, Andrea, it's just money.
It's just money. And I think, but we also have to be careful of where people are at. I remember when I was struggling, when I was a reporter, like literally budget was like, can I make the rent? Can I make my car? I was on TV already, but it was like, ooh, I'm running. Like I was now once you have like, a nest egg or you have a home, it's different. It's more visionary and bigger picture. But I do remember those times of why I struggled, right? Because every penny counted, right? It counted, right? The $200 could be like, you don't make your rent.
Oh, I've been in that place too, right? With 2 babies and a brand new business.
Totally.
Yes.
And
I know what that's like.
You have to honor that. But what's important to recognize is when you're out of that zone, don't stay with those emotions, right? Don't go back to that place where you were about to lose your job or if you're in that place, it's important to honor it because there are things that you need to do and be more scarce about. But if you're not, that's the point. It's like when you're not in that space anymore and we're still reliving, that scarcity, that's when you got to check and go, it's just money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm so glad you made that nuance and talked about that because yes. And I've been, in that place where $200 was an enormous amount of money. Yeah. I remember even when $30 was an enormous amount of money when I had 2 babies in a business. That was one of my things where we wanted to go out and have pizza and we couldn't. And I was like, you know what? I don't want this to ever happen to us again. Like, I don't want to be in this place. And so I used that as motivation personally to be able to go after my own goals. And, but yes, it's so emotional. It's so emotional. And I don't know if everyone puts that much thought into it. People think just like money is money. If you have more of it, that's great. If you don't have a whole lot of it, it's not great. It's like, it's so much more layered than that.
So
Please
layered.
do any work.
But also, I think it's important to celebrate our little wins. I know that we're wrapping up soon, but just real quick, it's a flashback to when you talked about Motel 6s. When I was a reporter in Palm Springs, I had to stay in Motel 6s because I didn't make that much money, and I stayed out there every weekend. So I booked out like all the Motel 6s, and I'd rotate in case there was someone following me. And I would go look at the Palm Springs. It was like the Marriott, the big Marriott, the resort, and we would go there and go to Costas.
I think I know exactly which one you're talking about.
We'd go to Costas, and I remember staying in the Motel 6 because it was the cheapest, and it still wasn't that cheap. I think some nights it was like $100 or something, or hundreds. But I'm like, oh, we're at the Marriott, And so I remember just 3 years ago, I did a keynote at this large convention, and I was the host and the MC of the whole event. And it was at the Desert Springs Marriott with my whole room. And I just remember driving by flashing back to when I was, I was making, I don't know, like $10 an hour and, working 7 days a week and driving by the Motel 6 and trying to be who I wanted to be. And then I'd come back, I'm like, oh, now I'm the keynote for this whole event. Oh, that's interesting. But to celebrate those little moments of growth, right? And not to live in the past, but to honor that. I think it brings it full circle. Honor the past, because that was I had such a good time having no money and working 7 days a week, and it was hard, and I learned stuff, and it was a struggle. But then on the other side, also celebrate how far you've come, and then live in that. In that. Now I can buy the $30 salad, and I'm not going to not make rent, right? I can
get your
lay
salad,
by
Angela.
the pool, lay by the pool, and then I'm not even going to book the Marriott. Maybe I'll book the whatever, the Ritz next time. And so. Once you get to that point, it's important to celebrate how far we've come to.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Well, I would love if you would tell everyone where they could find you. I think you're at Angela Chee TV. Is that right?
Yeah. So all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, at Angela Chee TV. And then my website is angelachee.com. And I'd love for you to tune into the podcast, The Power of the Only. And that's on all platforms. And we're just diving deep into new conversations with leaders, breaking barriers, defying the odds, and creating change. And it's really the place where I'm exploring different conversations. I do solo episodes on how to own your voice and your power, as well as interview top leaders. And it might be a book at some point. So tune in.
Yay. I love that. I'm so glad you have a podcast. It's so... the more you're on audio or video, the better, my dear. Yeah. So I'm super glad to hear that.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and have these deep conversations. But yeah, I go deeper in the podcast because there's that space.
We'll put all those links in the show notes to your site and your social media handles and all that good stuff. And listeners, thank you so much for joining me. You know how grateful I am for your time and that you choose to spend it with me and my guests. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye for now. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to the show. And just a quick reminder that if your company needs a speaker or a trainer, I might be the right person for you. I speak and do keynotes on confidence and resilience for mixed audiences, as well as do trainings on the Daring Way, which is the methodology based on the research of Dr. Brené Brown. So if you think it might be a good fit, hit me up at support@AndreaOwen.com or head over to my speaking page, AndreaOwen.com/speaking.
I'd like to introduce you to the Minimalist Moms podcast. It's hard enough being a mom, and the last thing you need is stress from too much stuff and an overcrowded schedule. For too long, I lived with the mindset that bigger was better, and the more I added to my life, instead of feeling better, I felt overwhelmed. It was time for a radical new mindset. Less is more. I'm not into extremes. I didn't throw everything away. My brand of minimalism is more about adding than subtracting. Get rid of the excess to make room for what you love. In other words, it's about living life with purpose. I hope you'll listen in and my guest and myself can inspire you to think more and do with less. The Minimalist Moms Podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.